There's a prison in Louisiana named after an African country where black men still pick cotton. Let me introduce you to the Louisiana State Penitentiary, or Angola as it's commonly referred to. It's the largest prison in America, spanning 28 miles or 18,000 acres. It houses up to 5,000 prisoners, and 75% of those prisoners are black. And about 74% of those prisoners are serving life sentences. The prison sits on land that used to be 7 different slave plantations, and it's named after the Angola plantation, which was named that because most of the enslaved Africans that worked that plantation were from the country of Angola. The prison has an incredibly dark history. It was born out of the convict leasing program of the 1800s and post-Civil War, where prisoners would be leased to plantations to go pick cotton and vegetables. And if you didn't know any better, it looked like slavery had never even ended. Prison used to be owned by a former Confederate general until it was sold to the state of Louisiana in 1901. And modern day, these predominantly black inmates at Angola are still working farm lines where they're picking cotton and vegetables under the unforgiving Louisiana sun for 2 to 40 cents an hour or nothing, while corrections officers sit on horseback with guns watching them. Now tell me, what does that look like?
There's a modern slave plantation operating in Louisiana under the guise of a prison. Angola prison, and people might wonder why is a prison in the American Deep South called Angola? Well, it's because that prison is named after a slave plantation, and the slaves came from Angola in Africa, and it's still commonly known by that name. And when you go onto the prison grounds, you'll see primarily African American inmates working the fields, guards on horseback, and inmates even being led around in shackles and manacles. How does the largest maximum security prison in the USA sustain itself? Well, like so many of the prisons across America, and in fact across the world, it's really propelled by the laws criminalizing drugs. The UN estimates that 20% of all prison inmates in the world are in prison because of drug offenses. How does that coexist with legal cannabis stores popping up all across America, Canada, and some of Europe now as well? Angola is also famous for its prison rodeo, in which inmates will perform for the entertainment of outsiders, doing daredevil stunts for as little as $250 if they're successful. This is an example of the way that the war on drugs has propelled a system of mass incarceration all across the United States, of which Angola is really just a kind of example par excellence.
Angola prison isn't a prison. It's a plantation that never closed. They built Angola on the exact land of a slave plantation. Same soil, same acres, just new chains. And today, it stretches out over 18,000 acres. That's bigger than Manhattan. Think about that. A prison the size of a city, sitting on land where enslaved Africans were forced to work. And instead of tearing that down, instead of facing history, they doubled down. They turned it into the largest maximum security prison in the United States. They didn't hide it. They didn't apologize. They just changed the uniforms. Black men, mostly sentenced to life. Many from petty crimes turned 3 strikes. They're being forced to pick cotton, harvest sugarcane, farm cattle, all under armed guard. It's not optional. If you refuse, you get punished. And for that labor, pennies, sometimes nothing. Out there in the 100-degree Louisiana heat, breaking their bodies for free. That's not rehabilitation. That's slavery with a time card. Angola makes millions off of this labor every year, and the men doing it have no choice but to keep the machine running. And the worst part is the labor doesn't stay inside Angola. The beef, the crops, the produce. It leaves the prison gates and enters America's food system. Some of it feeds other prisoners. Some of it slips into supply chains that stock your grocery store. So if you've ever wondered how slavery still touches your life, look at your fridge. Angola's fingerprints could be in it. You might be eating the aftertaste of bondage without even knowing it. This place is called the bloodiest prison in America for a reason. Guards on horseback with rifles, just like overseers on a plantation. Beatings for refusing to work. Solitary confinement, sometimes for decades, just for speaking up. Angola is notorious. They're notorious for abuse, rape, corruption, and death. It proves that slavery was never really abolished. It was legalized, rebranded, and scaled up. The 13th Amendment gave them cover. Slavery is banned except as a punishment for a crime. That one loophole is the reason that Angola is able to exist. So when people tell you that slavery ended in 1865, ask them about Angola. Ask them why in 2025. Black men are still working cotton fields under gunpoint. Slavery didn't end. It switched uniforms, picked up a new name, and kept the whip cracking. That name is Angola.
Slavery didn't end in 1865. It got a loophole. The 13th Amendment banned slavery except as punishment for a crime. That exception clause is doing more work in America right now than almost anyone realizes, and there's no better proof of it than a piece of land in West Feliciana Parish, Louisiana called Angola.
The American economy was addicted to slavery, was addicted to forced labor, and the South could not resurrect itself. And so there was this incredible economic imperative to bring back coerced labor.
Angola is the largest maximum security prison in the country, bigger than Manhattan. Roughly 5,000 men live there. Nearly 3 out of 4 of them are black, and every single one of them starts the same way, in the fields.
The Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola is one of America's most unusual prisons because it is, in some ways, a plantation. Once you pass through Angola's front gate, you can't help but feel that you've gone back in time to another South.
It's the largest maximum security prison in the country. Right now, there are 6,300 prisoners.
And here's the most interesting fact about Angola. Before it was a prison, it was 6 plantations, assembled in the 1830s by a man named Isaac Franklin, one half of Franklin and Armfield, at the time the largest slave trading firm in the entire United States. He built his fortune trafficking human beings, then used that fortune to buy land and work it with the people he trafficked. One of those plantations he named Angola, after the region enslaved people were taken from to work it.
The black codes were introduced, where black people could get arrested for the most banal things, like being too close to a white person in public, hanging out after dark, or walking without a purpose. In some states, stealing a pig was punishable by up to 5 years in prison. This was as much about devising new ways to enforce a white racial hierarchy as it was about making money. You see, after the Civil War, the South's economy, which depended on slave labor, fell apart. But once Parchman was up and running, the state made about $5 million in today's dollars within 2 years, and it continued to be run like a slave plantation until the 1970s.
Slavery ends in 1865, but the land doesn't change hands to freedom. It changes hands to a former Confederate officer named Samuel James, who leases every convict in the state of Louisiana and puts them to work on the same land, in the same fields, housed in the same slave quarters. This is convict leasing, the direct successor to slavery, made legal by the one clause in the 13th Amendment. It was so brutal that men suffered worse under it than they had under slavery itself, because a leased convict cost the state nothing to replace. A slave, at least, had been an investment. A convict was disposable.
Thousands of newly freed black men were arrested and forced into convict leasing, working on plantations and factories with brutal conditions, all under the label of punishment. Flash forward. Prison labor still exists today. Inmates, disproportionately black, work for pennies for the state and private companies.
The thing about convict leasing, it was worse than slavery, because during slavery, as bad as it sounds, the enslaved individuals were an investment for the slave owner. Therefore, the slave owner did not want to kill or destroy their investment. Under the convict leasing, they worked individuals to death, because if those convicts died, then the state just sent replacement convicts.
Louisiana bans convict leasing in 1898 after public outrage, and in 1901, the state doesn't tear the plantation down, it buys it. Keeps the name, keeps the fields, keeps the labor, just changes who's holding the deed. And that's not ancient history, that's the deed on file right now. Today, men incarcerated at Angola work those same fields, cotton, corn, soybeans, sugarcane, for 2 cents an hour. 2 cents under guards on horseback, limited water, no restrooms in the field. If you refuse or if you're too slow, you go to solitary. There is a lawsuit right now, men incarcerated there alongside the group Voice of the Experience, suing the state over what they call the farm line. A sociology professor testified that the line functions exactly like a plantation hierarchy did. Field work as the lowest rung, used as punishment and control. A federal judge agreed that the conditions were unconstitutional and then declined to actually stop it. That ruling, 60 pages long, never once used the word slavery, never once used the word plantation. It saw the field, it refused to name it, so let's name it.
Some prisons in the South used to be literal slave plantations. In 1901, Mississippi purchased Parchman Farm to put incarcerated people to work, and it operated almost the same way a slave plantation would. Prisoners worked 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, picking cotton and plowing fields. They slept in long, single-story buildings called cages. The superintendent operated like a slave owner, and the white guards functioned like overseers. Parchman isn't the only plantation turned prison. There's also Angola in Louisiana, the largest maximum security prison in the US, and the Cummins Unit in Arkansas. So how was any of this legal? Because even though the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, it made an exception for people convicted of crimes. They could still be forced into manual labor. So the idea was, if you could get black people in prison, you could put them back to work on plantations. So that's when—
This is not a metaphor. This is not prison is like slavery. This is one continuous chain of custody. Franklin to James to the state of Louisiana, over the same 18,000 acres, worked by descendants of the same people for the benefit of whoever holds power over them next. The only thing that changed is the paperwork. And it's not contained to Louisiana. Cattle raised on that land get sold at auction, trucked 600 miles to slaughter, and folded into supply chains for some of the biggest food brands in the country. The forced labor doesn't stay behind the fence. It ends up on shelves. It ends up on your plate. It ends up on our tables. The 13th Amendment freed this country from slavery with one hand and wrote the exception with the other. Angola is what that exception looks like when you let it run for 150 years without interruption. Same soil, same name, same crop, different century, same chain. The plantation never closed. It just got a badge. There are several lawsuits happening right now across the country for more prisons just like Angola that are a form of neo-slavery and neo-plantations, and I implore all of you to look them up, sign the petitions, and bring awareness and educate yourself on how things end up in the supply chain that are being farmed, built, and tended to by people who look like me, who have no choice, and are doing it for basically free.
Did you know that actual antebellum style cotton picking chattel slavery, like from before the Civil War, from like before the 13th Amendment freed the slaves, still exists in the United States today, down in Louisiana, outside New Orleans at Angola Prison. Angola was originally a slave plantation, named after the country where most of the slaves were from. And after the Civil War, when the 13th Amendment freed the slaves, they turned it into a prison. Now, the 13th Amendment has a little carve-out that says the slaves are freed unless you are a prisoner. So down in these southern states, they enacted the black codes and Jim Crow laws that were deliberately meant to re-enslave these black Africans. They would make their lives harder and force them into prison where they could re-enslave them. Today, Angola has a population of about 6,000 prisoners. Most of them will never be released. They will die there. About 80% of the inmates are black. And remember, Louisiana is one of the states that has a 3-strike law. So a lot of these people are in there on bullshit, not violent offender stuff. And they are out there literally picking cotton, like the slavery from before the Civil War that you're thinking of. Like literally. And what do they get for their work? According to the ACLU, between 2 and 40 cents an hour on average. It is literal antebellum style chattel slavery. But hey, there's a rodeo at Angola. You could go watch the rodeo. You could watch the slaves do rodeo stuff.
So welcome back, guys, from watching this video. This is what we call the modern phase of slavery in the 21st century. As someone will say, when you do the crime, you do the time. Yeah, we are not making justifications for crime, and doing time. What we have a problem is on what grounds and on what conditions these people are doing these crimes. And to know that this prison, Angola prison, that is famously known, is where you house inmates, black inmates, predominantly black inmates. All credit to the original content creators. From the videos we have looked at, you could notice that there were no white guys working these fields. They were all black guys, and gives you a sense of image or picture of what transpired in the early 900s, 1600s, 1700s, when slaves that were brought all across from Africa, indigenous FBAs, were made to work this field, whether they wanted it or not. And now we're exploiting the loopholes of the 13th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States of America to subject these men to dehumanizing situations and circumstances where you are meant to walk the fields for little or nothing. And it's amazing how some of the things that we take for granted, some of the groceries that some of us are, picking from the stores, are coming off from the back of these people who are breaking their bones and sweats. And most of these proceeds from this field are for multinational corporations that in 2025, in 2026, black men are still picking cottons in the streets or in the land of Louisiana is crazy. And I tell you, this is so wrong in every dimension, in every ramification. And I think that we need to go out and call this out, call it what it is. Call it what it is. Even animals are not treated this badly. I want to know what your thoughts, your opinions are in the comment section. I need you to share this word out to our black communities. We need to begin to put up things like petition to come against this kind of inhumane treatment down in the South. If you're a first time subscriber, you're welcome to my YouTube channel. I want to know what your thoughts, your opinions are. You're a returning subscriber, thank you. You're the reason why we do what we do. So let's get into the comment section. Let the conversation begin. I think it's something that is worth discussing, and so I want to hear the various views of persons on this platform. Trust to see you again on my next video.